Hey guys, you got Crave here, and let's talk about Remnant from the Ashes. It's one of the games that came out in the second half of 2019, and it was a surprising one. One of the things that made me make this particular video is that the final DLC, Subject 2923, is coming out next month. That DLC looks promising as it has new zones, bosses, weapons, and things of the sort. Now, this is a review of the base game. The short of it is that it's a great game, and I definitely recommend it for solo players, or even better if you can get your friends to join in. It's also not a AAA game, which means it costs less than the standard AAA fee. However, if you want more details on why I recommend this title, just stay on. We're going to be talking about its graphics, story, and gameplay mechanics, and we'll start with how it looks. For its price, it's a good-looking game. It has that depressing feeling in some areas, but not as much in some of the gameplay footage I've seen in Dark Souls games. When you first load up Remnant, the introduction will remind you of the Earth setting in Darksiders games, or if you've been gaming for quite a while now, then it might remind you of Hellgate London, but of course with 2019 graphics. The effects, environments, and characters are well done that they serve their purpose. There's enough shadow and shader effects to give you that feeling that it is a modern game, and at the same time it does set the tone for Remnant. The environments offer enough variety so that you get to visit other places where the color palette will adjust, and it also makes sure that the setting of the game isn't always gloomy in terms of feel. In terms of the effects from your weapons, there's enough of that it produces satisfying effects when your shots hit the enemy. What's great about it is that the weapon effects do not detract or ruin the gameplay experience. Your screen is not covered in effects, which would make it difficult to make things out. Now, in terms of character and monster models, it's just like my opinion of Darksiders 3, and it's very much the same. The bosses are really well done, the art style, the amount of texture, the movements given to them, it's really just great. But the other mobs and NPCs in the game just look very ordinary. And I guess that's intentional. After all, the bosses and games of the sort are very important, but yeah, it's just something I noticed. One negative that I want to mention about Remnant is that the cloth physics in the game for your character could really use some work. This was already an issue I noticed when the game first came out, and it still persists even now. It's a little annoying given that you do use the third-person view and you see your character all the time, but it doesn't really ruin the experience. It's just something you notice also while playing the game. Audio-wise, the gunfire sounds and effects are awesome, while environment sounds are just okay. The background music helps with the mood, but it's nothing awesome. So I think in games of the sort, it's more important that sound effects allow you to hear sounds from mobs or enemies that might be lurking about. Now, one minor frustration about the audio aspect of Remnant is that your character doesn't say anything at all in conversations, which is funny because there are existing presets. Gunfire could have done better in this part. The quick voiceovers do help in telling you when combat's done or when you may be engaging an elite mob. You hear your character making quick callouts while in the fight, and it is more obvious in multiplayer, but other than those things, there's not much in the voice part. And again, I do believe that Remnant or Gunfire could have done better in this area. Personally, this is the weakest aspect of the game, but I guess the format or setting still makes it work. The basic premise of Remnant is that in the 1970s or 60s, the Earth was ravaged by an evil force called the Root. Humanity is in shambles and struggles to survive on a day-to-day basis. It's, well, your typical post-apocalyptic format. Your goal as the main character is to look for a certain individual who has more information and possibly the key to ending the threat. You then travel to different realities to find this one person. The storytelling is done in a series of short conversations with different NPCs and some notes you find in the open world. It is understandable that there aren't too many individuals to interact with. It's the general theme or setting of games of the sort. The feeling of being alone or lacking in support helps to add to the dread factor during gameplay. Even when you visit other worlds, there aren't a whole lot of characters that you can talk to. NPCs are there, but just to help you, in a way, just to help you to move the plot along. While I do understand this setup, I was hoping there would be more in terms of storytelling, or the mechanics of doing so would be a bit more active. Remnant has this feeling of rich lore to it, and if it was delivered differently in the game, I think it would have been better. I know that doing so removes the mystery element or removes, well, future expansion content for future DLCs or what I hope would be a full-fledged sequel, but fleshing it out a bit more I think would have helped to satisfy my curiosity. Now, this is probably a very personal thing, but I thought that I should mention it. Still, Remnant's base game closes out nicely while offering the possibility of future content, like in their final DLC, which is due next month. The gameplay aspect really had me thinking that this was one of the best and possibly the best game of 2019. But let's not jump the gun and just look at how you start your journey. When creating your character, there is no specific class in the game. Of course, you do start out with a choice, but you are eventually free to build your survivor in any way you want. You can use any weapon you like and equip any armor you think is better. In addition, you also have traits that boost your character's skills. In this system, you are not locked down to any path when choosing them, so the trait points eventually become so abundant in the endgame that you really don't have to worry if you misallocated your points. You can always get more points later on. Another mechanic in the game, and in large part, it's a third-person shooter that's done really well and it will remind you of other games. It doesn't use the cover mechanics of Gears of War, but you have to weave and dodge enemy attacks from range and melee. Not being able to dodge can mean easily dying to enemies. Even ordinary ones deal significant damage, and this especially applies to elite and boss mobs. Not avoiding their attacks is a bad thing. One more thing I want to mention about Remnant and the boss fights is that unlike other games in the Souls genre, the bosses in Remnant make use of mobs as additional mechanics. I'm a bit split in this area as part of me wants more elaborate boss mechanics, while another part of me understands that the regular enemies can help to counter the range advantage of your character. With that, Remnant is mostly a ranged affair, and games that have a shooting mechanic, or games in general, feel better when you are brought closer to the feel of your weapon or the effect they produce. The opposite of this would be the floaty effect in games that give you that feeling that combat is lacking or gives you that disconnected feeling. All weapons in Remnant, even your melee ones, have the appropriate weight and feel to them when being used. Well, some melee weapons could use some work, but overall, combat feels satisfying and great in the game. Whether you are using a rifle-type weapon or automatic fire guns, the feel is great and impactful. The effects they trigger from mods also have a strong similar feedback. In addition, the usage of each weapon is very simple. You tap your key to attack, you use your melee weapon. If you aim down your sights, then you start using your guns. In terms of the weapon you can use, there's enough variety in them. Some of the ranged weapons are basic assault rifles, while you also have single-fire guns, but there are also other variations like beam weapons and those that fire elemental bursts. You also have a number of melee weapons in the game in the form of swords, a hammer, and things of the sort. Each weapon has different flavors and has a typical attack speed appropriate to the weapon type, so a large hammer is a bit slower than a claw weapon, although the speed difference really isn't very noticeable. There is a lot of freedom in weapon choice, and most weapons are good enough for most encounters. If you prefer a certain type of gear, it is possible to use it all the way through endgame, but they'll need upgrades. The materials for upgrading your weapons are available as you level up, but they're not really abundant, so this means being careful with resources. Now, if you played a game like Code Vein and remember upgrading your veils and weapons, then the system in Remnant is somewhat similar. What adds to the depth of your weapons are the mods or modifications equipped with those weapons. Some of these allow the flexibility of swapping some mods in and out, while some don't. Now, some weapon mods add a fire effect for your weapon for a limited amount of time. Now, some will allow you to create gravity fields, and some can even summon turrets or spirits to attack your enemies. It's really fun using mods. There are certainly some niche ones, but overall the visual effects are nice and the effect they produce on enemies is pretty much tangible. Equipping certain accessories like rings can also change the way some mod abilities behave. These small elements add flavor to your experience in Remnant. One last thing that adds to the fun factor of the game is the multiplayer component. Most of the time, it's really just fun roaming around and shooting things with someone. Doing this only progresses the campaign of the host, but it's fun because you still get to keep your loot. You also have adventure modes that allow you to target specific bosses for the specific loot you want. Now, what's difficult in the multiplayer component of Remnant is that its communication aspect needs some work. There is a voice option in the game, it's there, but more often than not, the volume from other players is pretty low, so it's almost useless. There's no chat system in the game, but there is a ping system, so it reminds you of Apex, but at the same time, it's not as robust as the ping system you have in that game. So Remnant definitely has a comm system, but it could use some work. In summary, I'm still tempted to say that Remnant was the best game of 2019. Now, it's not a perfect game, but it certainly was very impressive even when it first came out. Now, it didn't get much attention, so maybe I'm hoping that the final DLC can spark renewed interest and bring players in. I hope that Gunfire Games made bank with Remnant so that they can make a proper sequel. Expanding on the other world seems like a good plot point for the potential part 2. Anyway, thanks for checking this out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.